Well, some familiar faces in the audience, but a lot of new faces as well. Nice to meet you all. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of partnerships when it comes to climate resilience and installing green infrastructure. So a little bit of background and table setting. Back in 2016, the City of Boston started its Climate Ready Boston initiative, which involved doing a number of neighborhood-level studies to assess current vulnerabilities and risks to climate change and to lay out a plan for how to address some of those challenges. The primary vulnerabilities that the City of Boston is dealing with is not unlike most of Rhode Island. We are dealing with heat and extreme temperatures, extreme precipitation, sea level rise, and coastal storms. So today I'm going to just show you a couple of maps because everybody loves maps. So this is an image of the Climate Ready Boston viewer heat map showing what we anticipate to be experiencing for heat days over the next several decades. And so as you can see, we've already experienced some pretty extreme temperature rise, and we are expecting this to continue. I assume that most people have seen maps that look like this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on them. But just so that you're aware, the kind of really bright red area is our downtown area, as well as our East Boston area, which is the bit that's kind of north of the Inner Harbor here. So these are areas that are heavily paved, very little green space, minimal parks and tree cover. So again, seeing exactly what you would expect to see. So I know that everybody in this room knows what stormwater is, but typically level setting is really important when I present about green infrastructure. So just kind of high level, stormwater is generated when precipitation falls on all of those hard surfaces that I just mentioned in that heat map. And rather than being able to absorb into the ground, it runs off and enters into our storm drain systems. So what's the issue with that? And I actually struggle a little bit with calling stormwater a problem because I think that we need to be reframing stormwater as a resource, not a problem. But the two kind of things we have to deal with when it comes to managing stormwater is water quality and water quantity. And so in the City of Boston, we obviously have a lot of hardscape. For any of you who are urban dwellers, you have probably seen what collects on our pavements and hard surfaces. So during rain events, all of that kind of visible pollution, whether it's litter, leaf litter, sediment and grit and other things on roadways, and invisible pollutants, so nutrients, bacteria and other things, all of that gets washed off of our hard surfaces and ends up in our water bodies. And then the additional problem that the City of Boston has, and I assume that most of our New England cities also experience, is a quantity issue. We are seeing an increase in the frequency and intensity of storms in New England, and then across the country, but very specifically, it's kind of stark and extreme here. And what that means is that our existing storm drain systems, which were designed to manage smaller and less frequent storms, are becoming overwhelmed more often. So to give you an indication, the City of Boston storm drain system is designed to manage 5 inches of rain over 24 hours. And last summer, we got several storms that dropped 1 to 2 inches of rain in an hour. So our entire system was completely overwhelmed and was unable to just process the amount of water that we were seeing. So this is another of the Climate Ready Boston viewer maps. So you can see on the screen it's showing those teal areas are areas where we expect to and are already seeing flooding for the 10-year 24-hour storm event, which we are experiencing now in Boston. So as you can see, it's distributed across all neighborhoods, and this really does affect the whole city. And then we also have our wonderful coastal flooding issues. And so as you're seeing on the map here, we have our downtown areas where the majority of the commerce in our city exists. And so this area is also experiencing current coastal flood impacts as well as some predicted future impacts as well. So thankfully, we have green infrastructure. So green infrastructure uses plants and soils and other natural materials to capture stormwater and allow it to absorb back into the ground. So this helps with both the quality issue and the quantity issue. And I'll mention all the photos in the presentation are green infrastructure features in the City of Boston. You can see the little tags at the bottom that says the location, the agency or entity at the city who owns it, and then the neighborhood that it's in. So historically, green infrastructure has been very centered around stormwater management. I assume most of the people in this room who have some connection to green infrastructure learned about it because of trying to manage water quality or quantity. But in the city of Boston and in this role that I am in, I've been able to expand our understanding and our use of green infrastructure to address some of our major climate vulnerabilities and achieve these wonderful co-benefits that green infrastructure has. The list obviously includes things like supporting and growing our tree canopy, creating slower and safer streets, reducing our energy usage, addressing environmental justice, environmental injustices, including access to nature, food security, and a variety of other issues. And then we also obviously have our wonderful opportunity to do environmental education as part of green infrastructure. So I'm going to talk today about three things: the importance of collaboration and partnerships in my work and how it has allowed me to not just implement green infrastructure kind of across all city departments and across all neighborhoods in the city, but how it has kind of allowed me to create a program, a green infrastructure program that is really community-led and is really kind of guided by what I'm hearing from the public, from our nonprofits, from our community groups, our watershed associations, around what is important and what is needed. So I'll start with talking about supporting all of our city departments, and then I'll talk about the importance of GI maintenance contracts, because that is the question that I get at every talk that I give is, but what about maintenance? And then the last but not least is community partnerships. So for supporting all departments, we've done a couple of really wonderful things in the city of Boston that are definitely replicable in other cities and towns, as well as just within community groups. So the first thing that we did is we created a green infrastructure working group. So at the city of Boston, I currently host 4 groups. One is kind of a large cross-departmental group that meets every other month, and we have representatives from 20 different city departments and over 65 members. So this group was convened specifically to talk about stormwater, to talk about green infrastructure, to talk about what our various departments needed to get green infrastructure into their own work, as well as pointing out blind spots, if you will, that people who see and talk about green infrastructure every day might have. And it's actually been really enlightening to hear from our Disabilities Commission, from our Law Department, from our Mayor's Office of Immigrant Advancement, from all of these different groups that I might not otherwise engage with on a regular basis. There are also 3 subgroups, and the subgroups are smaller topic-focused groups. So we have one for coordination and maintenance, which is exactly what it sounds like. We focus on coordinating better across departments and how we're going to maintain green infrastructure. The second is our details and specifications group, and so we use the mostly engineers, landscape architects, and scientists in this group to create a set of standard details for the city of Boston, or green infrastructure standard details that we now use. And then the third is a policy group, so we talk a lot about policies that are needed across the city to really spread the implementation of green infrastructure, but do it in a way that makes sense for the city and the people that we serve. We also, my office makes capital requests for other departments. And so frequently it is an issue within cities that we are always competing with each other for our budgets. And that has created this kind of siloed, almost hostile budgeting cycle and sessions. And so rather than putting ourselves in a position where we're competing with other people, my office has started making requests to add green infrastructure to projects. So for example, the Public Works Department did a massive redesign for Cummins Highway, which is it's like a 4.2 stretch of roadway down in one of our southern neighborhoods in Mattapan. They added a bunch of green infrastructure, which increased the dollar amount for their construction project because they weren't originally planning on including any green infrastructure. And so rather than leaving it up to Public Works to figure out how to fund that, I submitted a capital request which was funded, and the funds were transferred to Public Works to do their project. So building that sense of collaboration, that sense of I'm supporting you in this, so that departments are viewing green infrastructure as a positive thing and not as something they're being told they have to do. And then the last thing is we try to build GI with other departments as much as possible. So wonderful example, because who doesn't love children and schools? So this spring, we built a rain garden at our local early education center in East Boston. The school actually reached out to us and had said, we'd really love to do a rain garden on site. Is there anything that you can do? So we popped out to the site, and this is what we found. So essentially, it's a sidewalk that led to nowhere, but it's wider than a standard sidewalk. It was 10 feet wide of concrete. And the area is like next to a driveway that comes in and out of their parking area, so it wasn't actually being used for anything. And so we did some design work. internally, like with our own staff, and we asked the teachers and the staff at the school to fill out a survey to request the types of plants that they wanted to see. And then we built the rain garden with the staff and the kids. So rather than a construction team coming in and building it and then one day saying, here's your rain garden, we allowed the staff and people who work and go to school here to be part of the construction. So actually the person in the photo here, that's Catherine Walsh. She's the Director of Sustainability and many other things on her title for Boston Public Schools. She's a wonderful ally and has been a wonderful partner. And then just adorable droves of tiny humans helping us to plant plants, which is quite possibly the best part of my job. So this is what the garden looked like the day that we planted it, and then this is what it looks like today. So just a few months, and we've got this beautiful plant establishment. The garden is loved by the children at the school. The principal's office is like right outside of this, like on the wall right here, and she sends us photos all the time because she loves it so much. So the long and short is partnerships across departments really allow us to, to just sprinkle GI throughout the city of Boston without, kind of having to go through that large, sometimes difficult process of convincing people that GI is the right call. And you can probably see there's downspout connections here, so the rain garden's actually managing runoff from the school's roof as well. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about was maintenance contracts, because what about maintenance? And so one of the first things that I did when I got my role with the City of Boston was I said to the mayor's team, we are going to do maintenance contracts right now. Like before we even start talking about new green infrastructure or new programs, we need to do some maintenance on the GI that I designed and built when I worked at Boston Water and Sewer that hadn't gotten any maintenance for several years, because you can't make the case to the public that you need more GI if your existing GI looks terrible. And so what we did was we have two maintenance contracts. One is a landscape, like vegetation maintenance contract, and then the other is a porous paving maintenance contract. The contracts are held by my office, so the Office of Green Infrastructure is a cabinet level office. We're not like in Public Works or in the Boston Water and Sewer Division. We're our own kind of separate thing. And these contracts are used to maintain green infrastructure across all city departments. The conversation that I had with legal was all of our funds are coming from the operating budget anyway. It's the general fund. It doesn't matter if it's Public Works or BTD or whatever. It's all the same funding source. So let me host these contracts. Let me pay for these. And that way the Public Works Department, BTD, Boston Transportation, Parks, and others can spend some time getting up to speed, training up their staff, maybe hiring new staff that specialize in this while I'm covering maintenance for them over the next couple of years. So we were able to do that. And then the additional thing is I procured these contracts through what I describe as creative contracting. We are a municipal entity, which means we are beholden to public procurement law, which can be very limiting and very difficult. And so rather than doing a standard low bid, because it's a service, not construction, we were able to do an RFP, which allows a request for proposals, which allows us to select our contractor based on the proposal and the way that their approach that they're going to, the approach that they proposed, as opposed to having to select the lowest bidder. And so because of this process, and it's a little bit more labor intensive because you have to review proposals, but it does result in getting contractors who are, ecological restoration contractors, people who have NGICP certifications, and all of these kind of wonderful GI experience that we were not seeing from our low bid solicitations. So we have a contractor, Parterre Ecological, who is our current maintenance contractor. They've been absolutely lovely and have really helped us. You can actually see some of them in the picture right now. They've really helped us restore the existing GI as well as construct some new stuff. And then we also are doing solicitations through the city's certified businesses list. And what the city's certified businesses list is it's all DEI-owned businesses. So usually it's minority and women-owned businesses. But the City of Boston allows for a 3-quote procurement for entities that are on the certified businesses list up to $250,000 contracts. So we've been able to do a couple of 3-quote solicitations to build some of our new GI and have gotten wonderful contractors off of our certified businesses list, again, instead of just doing a standard low bid system, which has been really nice flexibility. All right, just giving you a couple of examples of Parterre really in the plants doing some wonderful maintenance. You can see that our vegetation is lush and growing nicely. Another of our sites, this is a park site in East Boston. I really should have actually put in some before photos too, just so you can see the difference, but look, I'm going to back up. Needless to say, this looks absolutely beautiful now, but it did not look like this before we had the maintenance contracts. Okay, so example, Nubian Square. This is a project that was a collaboration between Public Works and Boston Transportation. The project started with this kind of large expanse of hard surface and minimal bike infrastructure, as well as pedestrian infrastructure that wasn't super enjoyable to walk on. And so this is the installation after the initial transportation project was done. The kind of dark black that you're seeing there, that is a porous asphalt bike lane, WIN. The red bark mulch that you're seeing there, those were supposed to be rain gardens, but they were value engineered out just before construction happened. And so we ended up with this, well, you'll see it in just a second, but essentially trees planted with red bark mulch around them. Oh, the last photo didn't come through. That's okay. So this is after we went in and did some restoration work where we removed the red bark mulch, several inches of soil, and essentially reinstalled, or installed for the first time, biossoil and native plants so that we actually had these rain gardens that were supposed to be there. So I'm going to show you red bark mulch. Lovely. And you can see that because the value engineering happened so late in the design that I'm going to point here, it's not a pointer. The inlets were actually kept in the curb infrastructure, and so for us to come in using our maintenance contractor and remove that soil, remove that bark mulch, put in the biossoil, sorry, I realize I'm probably blocking everybody over here, and plant native plants. This was done in spring of last year, and then this photo was taken just a few months later. So you've got beautiful native plants, wildflowers. There's a community group in this neighborhood called Visit Nubian Square that is doing additional maintenance work, and then Parterre obviously goes out and does their warranty work as well as their standard maintenance visits. And so this was taken this fall, just a couple of days ago. So really beautiful plant establishment, lovely color. The grasses of all colors are in, they're looking wonderful. You can see there's not a whole lot of flowering right now because it's fall, but even in the fall, there's still beautiful color. And it's just totally changed the way the Nubian Square stretch feels for cyclists, for pedestrians, and for people just like moving through the space. So the area that you're seeing on the screen right now, this is the Nubian Square Library, which is also along the project. And so I wanted to show folks that sometimes people think that pavers are like, they have to be ugly, or they can't be, pretty and designed nicely. And so we use some really beautiful drain covers as well as a nice pattern for our pavers. And so we created this really lovely plaza outside of the library that is also, supporting tree life and, we've got some tree infiltration trenches and stuff under the plaza as well. But it's a really beautiful space now. And we were able to put in this lovely little educational feature. So what we have here is upland, lowland, and wetland vegetation. And you can probably see there are these little cutouts in the side here so that children who are at the, well, anybody, not just children, people at the library can see water pass through the different soil layers. And you can actually see the different soil layers. So essentially this was like a visualization of what happens below the ground so that people at the site could actually see what's happening in the rain gardens, even though in the rain gardens you only really see the plant life at the surface. And that was built for like, it was like $2,000 or something. It was like a college group, basically. It was like, hey, can we build this? And they were like, yes, that sounds wonderful. You should put little window cutouts in it so people can see how water moves through the soil material. All right, so last but not least, I want to talk about community partnerships. So we have found that if the community asks for something, it is in your best interest to respond, to give them what they want as a way to kind of build not just this sense of being heard and that the city government is trying to respond to the requests that we're getting, but also because there are thousands and thousands of them, and there are 3 of us, like 4 of us in my office. So really using the support from our community to kind of increase and expand our impact. So a couple of fun projects that we have done. We often have community groups that reach out to us and ask if they can build, can I build a rain garden in my area? The project I talked about with the school, where the school reached out, hey, can we build a rain garden on our site? So these are some examples of kind of fun and maybe unusual partnerships that we didn't expect but turned out to be really wonderful. So the first is our West Street Urban Wild. And so this is an urban wild that is at the end of an industrial street that doesn't actually have like a sidewalk or anything, and the wild doesn't really have like a defined edge. And it's hard to tell, but in the background here, this is the Neponset River. Like, it's literally the road dead ends and then it's the river. And so what we had was this road with no drainage system and no sidewalk that is just gushing storm water down the street into the Neponset River, and then an urban wild that people don't even know is there or is available as a park. So our Urban Wilds team, the Neponset River Watershed Association, and the Epic Service Warriors, which is a local community group. It's a leadership group for young adults with disabilities in the city of Boston, reached out to us and asked if they could do a service project. And so for their service project, we designed this bioswale. We had the Epic Service Warriors select the plant material and help us make the plant palette, like essentially do the plant layout. And then we built this bioswale. And so this is the planting day. And so as you can see, the Epic Service Warriors have a range of disabilities, many of them physical. And we had this wonderful group of people. Ethan, who's down kind of like in the bottom of the bioswale, like scooted himself out of his chair and like sat at the bottom of the bioswale and just planted plants all day. And so it was just a really wonderful experience for us to see that like the interest to be involved in green infrastructure spans across all types of groups and all types of people. And by always doing outreach to one type of community organization, we're limiting ourselves. And we're missing out on potential partnerships like this one, which turned out to be really wonderful. Epic Service Warriors is also doing like additional maintenance on this site, as well as Parterre as well. And so this is Dorothy and Ethan, and they are super excited, and they have their wonderful Green Infrastructure Volunteer Program vests, which I will talk about in just a minute. And then another site that we did was on Arbor Day. We planted a bunch of trees and made a beautiful, well, 2 rain gardens at the Franklin Park Zoo, which is part of Zoo New England. And so we love chalk. So we frequently write on our sidewalks to draw people's attention to green infrastructure, because often people will walk right by it and not realize that it's there. It's a nice, low-cost, like non-permanent way to just direct attention. But essentially what we had was we had Franklin Park's horticulture staff. So all the people in the dark green vests that you're seeing are the Franklin Park's like horticulture team, as well as youth from the Boston Housing Authority Franklin Field location, which is just down the street from the zoo. And this is what the everything looked like once we were done. And I actually haven't been back to take pictures this fall, but I'm sure it looks beautiful. Josh and the others on the hort team say that everything's growing in nicely. They're really excited about it, and they're working on educational signage at the zoo. Okay, so last couple of slides, just wanted to point out another thing that we did for the maintenance of our GI is we started a green infrastructure volunteer program. So this is a citywide program. The goal of this program was to allow people in Boston to adopt a public green infrastructure feature. Most of the services performed are beautification, litter removal, weed removal, things like that. But the wonderful thing about this group of people is that they also all have my cell phone number, and they also have access to a maintenance checklist where they submit maintenance reports and damage reports. So these are individuals who walk by my sites every day, and they send me, hey, I think that somebody might have hit the curb here, like the curb's slightly bopped in, or hey, this tree looks like it's in rough shape, like it's split a little bit. Can we get someone out to prune it? Like they're sending me information that I cannot gather on my own. And my team can't gather on our own because we don't have enough people. And even with a maintenance contractor as wonderful as Parterre, they can't be everywhere all at once. So what we did is we selected 20 sites for the initial phase of this program. So these are our 20 sites. As you can see, they are in neighborhoods all across the city. We had the different sizes of the sites, the number of individual features on each site, and we have, I think we have 26 volunteers right now. Some of the volunteers are community groups. A lot of them are just individuals, like people who live nearby and wanted to be part of this. So the process basically works like this, and I will say that it took me 8 months to get a waiver that our city legal department was happy with, because the whole kind of purpose of this was, rather than asking people to come to an event at a specific time and place, and that's largely impossible for people, right? We have lives, we have schedules, it's very difficult for you to show up at a very specific time and place. The program provides training with me and my team, supplies, all city branded supplies, access to the maintenance checklist, my cell phone number, and all these things so that people could go out and do maintenance on their own schedules. The rules are pretty simple, during daylight hours, wear your reflective vests, because it's city branded, but also a lot of our features are in the roadway. Don't lose your tools, don't touch anything sharp or hazardous, like submit a maintenance report, and thank you for helping us keep this stuff looking beautiful. The additional piece is we'd like to have our volunteers involved in plantings, and so when we do replantings at sites that have been adopted, we invite the volunteers to come be part of that, and we've also allowed the volunteers to select plant material as well. So if there's a flower or a plant that they really love, we allow them to choose it, and then we put it in the rain garden or bioswale or whatever with them. The last one is we have a wonderful partnership with PowerCorps. So PowerCorps Boston is a youth earn and learn jobs training program. It is stolen from the City of Philadelphia's PowerCorps program, which started as a green infrastructure training program. So the City of Boston's PowerCorps program is broader than that. It's green infrastructure, it's arboriculture, they're learning about installing green energy systems. It's a much kind of more robust offering, but there is a lot of green infrastructure work as well. And so we are able to get these young people out into the field. They're doing Thursdays with PowerCorps right now, which is fall maintenance on GI. And then they're also doing, replantings, and throughout the year, just doing general site visits and things like a maintenance contractor would. We have many young individuals who have been part of PowerCorps who are now working for local environmental groups that do green infrastructure work, which has been wonderful, as well as a group of them that have formed a worker-owned cooperative and is now holding a parks contract doing maintenance on green infrastructure for parks. So lots of really wonderful, I could do a whole presentation about the PowerCorps kind of job pipeline that we're working on, and I'm happy to talk more about that later, but it's a really wonderful program, and honestly one of the best decisions I think we ever made was telling PowerCorps that green infrastructure existed and that there were jobs in this field and that they should really get involved early. Okay, so I have been talking for 30 minutes. I'm going to pause there, and thank you all for allowing me to present a little bit about our work, and then I believe we're going to open it up for some questions.
Yeah, we do have a microphone in the back if you have questions, or if you're really loud, you can just stand up in your seat. So, questions?
Oh my gosh, no questions?
Yes, get one, a couple of these.
Right here.
So do you have any really long-term or tools for long-term maintenance protocols? So
Like O&M plans and
trees, like in 10, 15, 20 years, how to make sure that any infrastructure or guards around the trees are not in conflict with their growth?
Yeah, so starting with trees, and then I'll go into larger kind of GI. So we are in the process of creating an ordinance, tree ordinances. There's two of them. One of them is for trees on public land, and one of them is for trees on private land. But within the ordinance, it includes operations and maintenance over the lifespan of a tree. And so some of that is in progress now. It includes, tree protection for construction, tree establishment periods, tree maintenance over time. It includes pruning, pest management, pruning for health versus pruning for, in response to storm damage, a variety of things like that. And we're also looking at how we're planting trees, specifically street trees. We have kind of a mishmash in City of Boston in terms of, how we have, not just planted, but also like whether we use tree grates or whether we just have open tree pits, or whether we're installing trees in stormwater features. And so we're really heavily moving now towards installing trees in stormwater features of some kind, including street trees. And so whether that is a subsurface tree infiltration trench with stone or with sand-based structural soil or soil cells, or whether it's using a resin-bound stone at the surface rather than a tree grate or having an open tree pit, all of the work that we are doing is attempting to give the tree its best shot at early establishment, because the city of Boston has it's a 73% chance that a tree will survive in its first 1 to 5 years of life, which is a huge mortality rate for juvenile trees. It's like actually high for even similar cities across the country. And the city of New York several years ago did a study to try to figure out why they were experiencing tree death, especially in street trees. And what they found was, yes, it was lack of access to water and insufficient soil volumes, which we all kind of knew because we plant trees in these tiny little coffins and they get very little soil volume. 300 cubic feet of soil is not enough soil for a tree, just so we're all clear. So now we are looking in City of Boston, 750 to 1,500 square feet of soil for a tree, which is huge. But the larger piece here is the New York City findings found that, or report found that compaction was actually the leading cause of death in their trees, which means that open tree pits, because most cities had said, we'll just make the tree pits bigger, the openings bigger, so that more water can get in. But what that meant was people were walking through the tree pits and crushing down the soil, which means water and air, which are the two things that trees need to live, could not get to the tree roots. And so that's why people are like, oh, tree grates are wonderful. But the problem is that the tree grows, and tree grates often are not upsized as the tree grows, and so they end up cutting into the tree. So we had some very long conversations with our Disabilities Commission about, hey, let's talk about using a porous kind of paving at the surface instead of doing open tree pits. And not to our surprise, but to our kind of delight, Disabilities was like, yeah, we hate open tree pits. They're giant trip hazards because the soil level gets compacted very quickly and then you're left with concrete lips that people just like trip and fall over. They're a nightmare for people with mobility limitations. They're a nightmare for people with visibility limitations. Let's stop doing this. And so we said, great, what about porous pavers or resin-bound stone? And we basically went out, did a bunch of field visits, saw different types of treatments, and came to the conclusion with our Disabilities Commission that poured in place resin-bound stone or a porous like flexi kind of pave was much nicer, filled the tree pit, created a consistent level surface with no trip hazards, and can be cut back as the tree grows. And by cut back, I mean our city arborists can go out with a knife and cut it back, as opposed to when you use, a porous concrete or something where it has to be actually like, cut back with machinery, or a tree grate which has to be lifted out with a machine and then replaced. So fun tidbit for you all, try some resin-bound stone around your tree pits. We've had really wonderful success in several of our demonstration projects around the city, and Disabilities is really happy about it. It creates a safer sidewalk and has allowed us to put trees on sidewalks where we otherwise wouldn't have been able to put them. How is that possible, you might ask? In the city of Boston, Public Works has rules about how wide a sidewalk has to be in order to put a tree. And spoiler alert, it's 8 feet from back of curb to back of sidewalk. Have you been to Boston? Have any of you seen an 8-foot sidewalk in Boston? Because they don't exist. So we essentially were redoing sidewalks across the city, and then trees were basically not an option because the sidewalk wasn't wide enough to accommodate the 4-foot by 3-foot tree pit that had to be there. So, conversations with our Urban Forestry Division, with Disabilities Commission, we are now putting trees on narrower sidewalks. We are giving them the soil volume they need underground. At the surface, we are using resin-bound stone, both in the sidewalk pedestrian zone and around the tree. So that way we've been able to fit all the things that we want, because our Disabilities Commissioner, Kristen McCosh, who's absolutely wonderful, said it perfectly, which is a sidewalk without trees and shade is not accessible. You are asking people who are moving slowly to walk down a boiling hot sidewalk. So trees go hand in hand with accessibility. They're not in competition. And so this kind of like existence of my office and this whole new kind of approach to porous surfaces and managing stormwater has so many co-benefits from a accessibility perspective, from a tree health perspective. People seem to be really happy. So GI is also going into a lot of our standards and guidelines across other departments, not just our own. Sorry, I know that was a long-winded answer, but it's a really good question. I love it.
I think we have time for one more question.
Sorry, everybody.
So we have a fairly large rain garden in our library, which is a cat exposed to fixtures and progress. And it's really a quite severe slope. Every dry season, we lose plants.
Yeah.
And we don't have like an active maintenance program. We depend on volunteers, which have been mostly unsuccessful. And the same with our trees, getting water to our trees when they're planted. As you know, a young tree requires a fair amount of water on a weekly basis, so we would need somebody to bucket water in some cases. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, so the question was a rain garden that has a pretty extreme slope and they lose plant material every year when it's dry, as well as volunteers not being the most effective and trees requiring lots of water to establish. So a couple thoughts. I'd swap your plant palette, meaning the plants that you've got in the rain garden may need too much water, and it may be worth subbing out and putting in some plants that maybe are a little bit more drought tolerant. And I know that volunteers can be difficult, meaning difficult in that they take a lot of management. You have to you have to have constant contact with them, and you have to give them ways to talk to you and all that. It's labor intensive. And so I would say make sure that you have redundancies. The maintenance plan that I just described to you all with our volunteer program, our contracts, as well as all the the community groups, multi-pronged on purpose. Making sure that there are multiple ways built in to make sure that somebody is doing some kind of maintenance at any given time. So I would say whether it's a friends group at the library or a series of volunteers, get more volunteers than you think. One of them will show up once a month. It increases the chances that someone will come out. And then for the trees, the main reason that we're putting trees into stormwater features now is because our new trees were not getting enough runoff or enough water to establish. And the contracts to bring out a watering truck are remarkably expensive. Water is very inexpensive, but it's complicated to do watering on street trees because you have to shut down a travel lane. There's risk to the individuals doing the filling. And so one of the things that we have started doing is not mounding our trees up, but setting them down so that any runoff in the area is going to end up in that space. People are very concerned about stormwater being bad for trees. What about the pollutants? What about the salts? What about all these things? Trees don't care. The majority of them would rather have salty water than no water. And you have to remember that we live in New England, so we salt for 4 months out of the year, and then 8 months out of the year, it's raining clean water, non-salted water. And so a street tree that is planted in a pit that's only getting spray from the road is getting salt, and then it's hanging out in the soil for quite some time. Whereas a tree that is in a stormwater feature gets salt during the months where the tree's kind of dormant, and then during the spring, summer, fall, it's getting flushed for months. So the kind of actual accumulation of soil, salts in soil, has been rather minimal. So put the trees in a kind of recessed, lower condition. Don't be afraid to dig channels to get water to your trees, things like that. That's kind of how we've approached it. And then obviously we do the watering contract as well, but it's not the only thing that's watering trees anymore. We're also doing a lot of public education. We have an Instagram account, a bunch of other stuff, which is what's on the board right now, that we do a lot of public education. We post twice a week, and we put out information about trees and plants and green infrastructure, just trying to give people the tools they need to help us and to help themselves. So hope that's helpful. I know it's not a perfect answer, and sorry we didn't have time for more questions, everybody. I really wanted to answer all of your questions, but feel free to come find me. I'll be around for a little bit.
Great.